The deployment of the Oreshnik hypersonic missile by Russia is not the primary threat. It is a calculated distraction. The media focuses on the kinetic payload, the speed, the launch-on warning posture it necessitates. This is a deliberate misdirection, focusing global attention on the mathematics of interception. The real vector of attack is not a sound, but its absence. The strategic objective is not physical destruction, but systemic paralysis. The cost of deploying a hypersonic weapon is astronomical. The cost of severing a subsea data cable is negligible. The targets of crude coercion, unable to compete symmetrically, are mathematically incentivized toward the latter. According to CSA's threat models, over 95% of global data traffic, the lifeblood of the entire financial and military apparatus, transits through a few hundred vulnerable undersea fiber optic cables. Many lie in shallow, unprotected waters. This is the soft underbelly of the global order. Simultaneously, RUSI reports highlight emerging capabilities in dazzling and blinding low Earth orbit satellite constellations. The objective is to create a combined arms blackout, cut the undersea arteries and blind the orbital eyes. This protocol transforms the dominant global power into a blind Leviathan, immensely powerful, but deaf, dumb, and swinging at shadows. This is not an act of war against a nation. It is an attack on the system's solvency. Without data, markets cannot clear. Without satellite navigation, carrier groups cannot project force. It is the ultimate asymmetric counterlever, designed not to win a battle, but to trigger a cascading liquidity crisis in the architecture of Western power itself. A protracted conventional war is the fastest route to domestic insolvency. CSIS analysis confirms that for Moscow, a long war is a severe domestic liability, draining the national budget and eroding public tolerance. The kinetic cost of a symmetrical ground war is unsustainable. This isn't a military problem. It's a balance sheet problem. It's a solvency crisis at home. When a state's conventional power begins to fail, it does not surrender. It pivots. This perceived weakness forces a strategic recalculation away from symmetrical attrition and toward asymmetric leverage. The objective is no longer to win their war, but to make the cost of continuing the war unbearable for the opponent's entire system. The deployment of the Oreshnik hypersonic missile is not a tactical evolution. It is a declaration of a solvency war. Al Jazeera reports confirm its use. This single, relatively low-cost platform is a systemic vector designed to render multi-trillion-dollar carrier groups and air defense networks financially and strategically obsolete. It is an attack on the economic viability of Western force projection. This blueprint is being replicated. Faced with crude coercion from Washington, direct threats of being bombed, and demands to expel Iranian and Cuban operatives, Caracas is mathematically incentivized to deepen those exact asymmetric alliances. These are not emotional acts of defiance. They are calculated counter-levers to raise the systemic risk and enforcement cost for the aggressor. The motive is irrefutable. The accelerating failure of symmetrical structures like the G20 creates the power vacuum. Fracturing alliances, evidenced by Denmark's shoot-first warning over Greenland, are the tremors. The targets of coercion, unable to compete symmetrically, deploy asymmetric vectors to trigger a solvency crisis in the global order itself. The goal is to force a margin call on the entire unipolar system. The entire business model of modern warfare is insolvent. For generations, symmetrical power was built on platforms of steel, aircraft carriers, fighter jets, main battle tanks. These were assets. Today, they are liabilities on a balance sheet approaching a solvency crisis. The kinetic cost curve has inverted. This is not a metaphor, it is a mathematical certainty. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, provides the core data. On one side, a $5 million main battle tank, a product of a multi-billion-dollar industrial base, requiring years of training and a complex logistical tail. On the other, a $500 first-person view drone, often assembled from commercial parts with an explosive payload attached. The math does not lie. For the cost of a single tank, an adversary can deploy 10,000 kinetic vectors, each one a potential mission kill. This radical cost inversion is the engine of what strategists call the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal force has collapsed. It's a systemic accelerant, decentralizing kinetic capability away from nation-states and into the hands of any actor with a credit card and a grievance. This is not about fighting fairly. It is an economic attack vector designed to impose unsustainable costs on a symmetrically superior force until its financial structure breaks. When a target state is coerced by a dominant power, as seen with threats against Venezuela's oil or Russia's economy, it is not incentivized to build a rival tank factory. It is mathematically compelled to invest in the asymmetric lever that offers the highest, most catastrophic return. The drone is not just a weapon against a tank, it's a weapon against the dollar that funded the tank. It is the trigger for a systemic solvency event. The protocols of containment have failed. The designated conflict zones, once geographically and economically quarantined, are now metastasizing. These are not isolated regional flare-ups. They are interconnected proxy laboratories. They serve as live fire test ranges for asymmetric economic and kinetic weapons. Consider the operational theater. The G20, the designated framework for global economic stabilization, is now clinically irrelevant. Its documented failure to manage debt, inequality, and systemic risk is not an accident. It is the accelerant. This failure created the power vacuum now being filled by crude coercion. The dominant state response is predictable. Direct, symmetrical pressure. In Venezuela, Washington issues explicit threats, demanding the expulsion of Iranian and Cuban operatives and halting oil sales to designated adversaries before production can increase. This is a tactical error. It mistakes a sovereign state for a corporate subsidiary. The targets of this coercion, unable to compete symmetrically, are mathematically incentivized to deploy asymmetric counterlevers. These are not acts of desperation. They are calculated systemic attacks. In Ukraine, the deployment of the Oreshnik hypersonic missile is not about destroying a single target. It is a vector designed to render an entire generation of Western air defense architecture obsolete, a direct strike on the balance sheet of the military-industrial complex. These gray zones are laboratories for escalating probes. A diplomatic probe, like Denmark issuing a shoot-first warning over Greenland, tests alliance cohesion. An economic probe, like Venezuela's outright refusal of U.S. demands, tests the durability of the sanctions regime. The kinetic probe in Ukraine tests launch-on warning tolerance. CSIS and RUSI analysts note these are rehearsals. This isn't a war against a nation. It's a war against a systems ledger. The ultimate objective is not conquest, but a solvency crisis. The prediction is therefore not a location, but a financial event. Within 18 months, expect a synchronized deployment from these laboratories. A kinetic escalation in a new theater, paired with a formal announcement by a bloc of states moving significant commodity settlements off the dollar. The goal is to trigger a cascading liquidity failure in Western markets. The math is irrefutable. The launch-on warning protocol is a function of time. It is a defensive algorithm designed to prevent a successful decapitation strike. If early warning systems detect an inbound nuclear launch, the protocol demands a retaliatory launch before the incoming warheads arrive and destroy the capacity to respond. The entire system is predicated on the integrity of its sensors. This creates a systemic vulnerability. The fog of digital war is not about kinetic weapons. It is about exploiting this time-based protocol. A targeted cyber attack, a single vector of malicious code, does not need to destroy a city. It only needs to blind the early warning satellites and ground-based radar. The commander is now forced into a binary decision with incomplete data. The screen is black. The clock is running. Is it a system error, or is this the prelude to a full-scale first strike? CSIS war games consistently demonstrate that the mathematical incentive is to assume the worst-case scenario. Hesitation guarantees annihilation if the attack is real. This is the ultimate asymmetric lever. A state facing overwhelming conventional force or economic coercion, as seen in Venezuela, is incentivized to develop this capability. The deployment of hypersonic weapons, like the Oreshnik, cited by Al Jazeera, further compresses the decision-making window to zero. The objective is not to win a nuclear war, it is to weaponize uncertainty itself, threatening a global solvency crisis as a form of deterrence. The failure of symmetrical institutions like the G20 is not a bug, it is a feature of systemic decay. This power vacuum is being filled with crude coercion, evidenced by Washington's ultimatums regarding Venezuelan oil. The targets of this pressure, unable to compete symmetrically, have already demonstrated the deployment of next-generation asymmetric levers. The Oreshnik hypersonic is not just a weapon, it is a statement of capability. The next vector, however, will not be kinetic. It will be a systemic attack targeting financial solvency. Within the next 12 months, expect a multi-day, attribution-impossible shutdown of the industrial control systems at a critical U.S. energy logistics hub, such as the Port of Houston. It will manifest as a catastrophic software failure, a ghost in the machine. This is not war. It is a calibration shot designed to precisely measure the cascade effect on global energy liquidity and test the kinetic cost of a U.S. dollar solvency crisis.